subject to the fundamental issue, the vital issue, the vital emergency for our country. Our independence depends on that question. Same thing for our social model. The question of controlling our expenditure and limiting our over-indebtedness. Your support, the minimal agreement without which I will not be able to continue my mission. I'm asking your approval on one single point, the realization of the country's situation. France has not had a balanced budget for 51 years. For 51 years, every year, expenditures go up, deficits repeat themselves, and debt is accumulating. Every year, each year, we spend much more than the year's receipt. Of course, it is justified in periods of crisis. The crisis of subprime, which was a major financial crisis under Sarkozy, and the series of crises we've had since 2020, COVID, Ukraine, the energy crisis, inflation, and threats of all sorts. But we continue spending and we never go back. It has become a reflex, almost like an addiction. Ordinary expenditures of the country, current expenditures for public services, for retirement, for pensions, to repay our healthcare costs, everything is financed with credits, hence overrun every year. Every year, for €1 of expenditure, of excessive expenditure, we've had to borrow, like a company borrows from the bank when they have a deficit. €1 in deficit is an extra euro in debt. And the addition of deficits by billions every year has led us to a huge accumulation, 3.5 trillion in debt at this very moment. This accumulation has a price. It is the fact that we have every year debt to service the debt, what we have to pay creditors in terms of interest and capital. And this is an amount we have to pay to avoid bankruptcy. If we didn't pay back, we wouldn't be able to borrow a single cent. But the problem is that we cannot live in a country like ours without borrowing to pay the civil servants, the pensions, to fulfill our obligations as borrowers. Our obligation on a yearly basis and is already above what our country produces every year in terms of growth and progress on top of the year before. You need to have the exact figures in mind because those figures are far from abstract. They say something that is obvious, which we can't pretend to ignore. Every year, if we keep the present rhythm of growth and inflation, every year, France, over the previous year, produces for an amount of 50 billion euros. In the face of this average figure of 50 billion, in 2020, the installments represented about 30 billion a year. In 24, the yearly installments were 60 billion. This year, 67 billion. Next year, in 26, it will be 75 billion. 27, 85 billion. And by the end of the decade, 107 billion. On the one hand, you create 50 billion with work, and you have to repay more than 107, the double. In other words, the work of a single year, all the progress we want for our people, for our children, all this is entirely repaid to our creditors. And most of our creditors, 70%, are foreigners. Those are compulsory expenditures that produce nothing, do not produce an extra service, not a job, not an equipment can be produced with that money. Our country is indeed working. We think we're getting rich, but in fact, we're getting poor. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a very silent and invisible hemorrhage. And if it is that unbearable, we shouldn't be able to bear it. We shouldn't tolerate it. This is the meaning of my declaration. Captain of the boat that is very much aware of the catastrophe, I'm saying that our duty is right away to make sure the boat and we can survive on it. Everybody's telling me, well, it's not that urgent. You're too impatient. You want to go too fast. The ship is still floating. What's the problem? Do not disturb the passengers and the crew. This is precisely where we disagree. This is where we should each take our responsibilities. On the contrary, I'm saying that if we want to save that ship, the ship on which we are with our children, we have to act today, right away. And it is not impossible. It only requires everybody's mobilization and a moderate effort on the part of each of us if we do it on time. But please go beyond those consequences for the French people. For 1 minute, think about what would happen if we didn't do anything. Wherever we come from, we're all heirs of France. It is the single destiny. We are a middle power by the number of inhabitants. This is what we are today. And today, France's destiny is threatened by our lack of responsibility. For a nation, the question of influence is vital. The ability to disseminate our universal values. Those values are threatened. Human rights, rights of women, the right to the freedom of women, the rights of children, the right to privacy, the right to freedom of expression, the right to freedom of religion, the right to education, all of those rights, which is very large in France and always been. Who is defending that but France? How can France defend all of these values through the EU if France is too weak, if it has lost its credibility by losing its sovereignty? We are not defending now our only interests, our health, or prosperity. We are threatened defenders of threatened values. We have to be able to become independent again if we want to maintain our influence. France is imposing respect. If we can have our values respected, being submitted to debt is like military submissions. Being dominated by arms or being dominated by creditors is the same. In both cases, we're losing our freedom. In both cases, it is up to us to emancipate, to find the road to freedom. It only requires an effort on our part. That's why France, under the authority of the President of the Republic, has chosen to equip its armies and soldiers, the military finance law. As you know, for that law to be adopted, we need to have complementary investments decided because of a series of dangers France and Europe are faced with. Those complementary and necessary investments represent an extra 3 billion this year in the plan we presented in July. This is the reason why the government is also proposing a plan to reduce its debt so that France in a few years can improve that problem of debt. In 4 years, which is a reasonable deadline, I'm not saying that we won't have debt anymore in 4 years, but our debt will not longer grow. That is the plan. In 2029, reach the threshold, the 3% a year threshold, as of which debt will no longer increase. And if the debt no longer increases, creativity, work, confidence, all this means that the country will recover. All this is favorable. We have the technologies for that. We have artificial intelligence, or intellectual and cultural creativity, or arts, or research. If we can get rid of those chains, then we will be able to flourish as a country with future generations. Everything is ready. Everything is emerging. We only need your determination. This, of course, means a number of efforts, moderate efforts that should be tolerable, spend a bit less than expected and plan, stop expenditures, and say in front of our people that nobody will be left out, but we have to take care of our youngest French people. I have talked about the youngest French people and the weight on their generations. The young French men and women will carry for 30 years or even more, will carry the weight of the billions of debt taken out by their parents. They will have to pay for that debt. This debt was not taken out to equip the country as we should have done. Those billions of debt were dedicated to current expenditure, daily expenditures, which a normal country should have every year. For decades now, on this point, we have broken the confidence contract between generations. I have seen and noticed how the young people feel they are a sacrificed generation. We won't have a retirement, we will never have a pension. And today, I know very well that you want us to increase the burden on young people. On the contrary, we think we should reduce that burden to free them from the slavery we put them in. Order. It is simple to tell you about the dual challenge for these young people and dual fare. On the one hand, they're looking for a job, they're looking for a housing. In some areas, it is very difficult, and even for students, a generation that does not see a future for themselves. That situation for us is intolerable from a democratic point of view, unbearable from a moral point of view also. That is also the awareness we have to have. The oldest among us should alleviate the debt for our children. Don't just tell them you love them if you're ignoring the burden of debt they will have to repay in the future on your behalf. Thank you for shouting. It gives me a chance to have a sip of water. I just told you about the need to have more awareness. In the last few months, I have tried to be as transparent as possible. I have seen that a number of people still want to look the other way. In the last few weeks, since we have started this work, the first sentence has become we are not denying the situation, but we disagree with the methods, with the decisions, with the rhythm at which you want to reduce debt, with the root causes. We will fight this, and that's why we want to overthrow this government. Some people say, and I know that we have to ask the migrants to pay more. The foreigners are responsible for everything. And I think some people even say that we're wasting our money with on migrants. Some other people say Europe is the cause of everything. 10 billion here, 10, 20 billion there. It's always easy to say. I agree with you. We should take measure by measure and see whether there are anomalies or unfairness for our nationals. At that subject, I've decided to do something about the state medical aid to make sure I would take into account Mr. Evans' report. I was glad to see that we are the first government that is going to take into account that report. But I've heard other people say, oh, this is intolerable. The savings made is far from representing what we actually need. Another group of people say we have to ask more money from the rich, from the wealthy. Here again, I am not underestimating the efficiency of that measure. Bernard Arnault knows about it. He has become a target of a magical bullet. They are like voodoo statutes that have become targets. Please, I am not defending the wealthy people, not criticizing them, but I am aware of what these wealthy people do for our country every day. The surplus in the luxury sector is 40 billion euros a year, and that does contribute to France's image. Tourism is also a sector that represents lots of jobs. So some people say just take their money or take 2% of what they have and France's problems will be solved. You're forgetting two essential things here. The first one is that a country like ours needs investors. The 1% of the richest represents most of the private productive investment in France, and you forget a second consequence. In the international world, which is ours, those who are targeted have a very simple solution to all this. They just move out of France. They have a series of countries that will welcome them very nicely in Europe, Luxembourg, Belgium, the Netherlands, for corporations. Ask our British friends. They have decided to tax foreigners who didn't pay tax until now. They have moved, and the immediate consequence was the increase in real estate prices in Milan. By the way, as François Hollande knows, that kind of tax measures is forbidden by the Constitutional Council, which has decided that it was contrary to the Constitution. But here again, I would like to, you will be able to take the floor afterwards. Let's listen to the Prime Minister calmly. But I want to repeat here and before you that we will have to find a kind of a contribution that will make sure the wealthiest can make a specific contribution to the national effort. We have to carry out in-depth studies in order not to continue tax planning strategies that are not good for equality and that are controversial from a moral point of view. I have proposed middle of July that parliamentary commissions take part in this work on the solidarity of our tax system. The easy solutions will never be enough to solve our problems. Let's note, by the way, that between those who assert that we're going to increase taxes by 30 million and those that do not want to increase taxes at all, some say we're going to take the resources spent on foreigners. We have those who say that they will oppose that measure. Everybody says you want to overthrow the government. That will be a catastrophe for France. The problem, the threat for France will remain total because, ladies and gentlemen, members of parliament, you do have the power to topple the government, but you cannot erase reality. Reality will remain the same. Expenditures will keep increasing even further, and the debt burden will be increasingly heavy and expensive. There's only one way out for France. Today, like in the 1950s, when Général de Gaulle and Pierre Mendès France were both saying in the same direction, in one case, that a country that is not capable to balance its budget is a country that abandons itself. And the other one said, I don't want the balance of public finance to go through the constant increase in debt. That is the very question that I'm asking you today. Ladies and gentlemen, in this unexpected approach, in order for parliamentarians to take their own and personal responsibilities from a human point of view, all those who are seeing that something is wrong, even if it's always easier to ignore the situation, in this approach, there is a certain idea of democracy and government. I've chosen to address myself to you as if destiny wasn't written, as if the answer was not announced already in all media by all of the groups. So I'm directing to you. I refer to the Article 27 of the Constitution. The right of vote is personal, which means that slogans and mottos are not what we need today. You have to appeal to your personal conscience. All political parties which are not part of the government at the present time, all political parties that are not part of the government have announced their decision to overthrow this government, which is not a major thing since we don't even have a majority, absolute or relative. And as I already know, we already knew this government wouldn't last very long. I want to make a clarification here. I have a high vision of political movements. I started when I was 20 in the same political party. I never left that political party. I have defended it, whereas we weren't many to believe in it. I have carried that political conviction, and I am proud of the generation of people around me. And I am certain that on many of those benches, we have the same feeling of faithfulness to that party. But political parties also have a major defect. This is what General de Gaulle was saying. They are always going to be divided. It is unfortunate. Our country needs clarity very urgently. We need unity very urgently, and division will probably be the most important forces. You're saying that you want to overthrow the government. Those political forces are opposed to one another. Strangely enough, those political parties or enemies have incompatible ideas, and they do tend to insult one another. What those political groups and parties are, in fact, preparing, if they do continue in division, they're preparing for chaos. Everybody will be shouting in their own court. Nothing good will come out of that chaos. Therefore, my government is engaging its responsibility, which means that I'm saying here, ladies and gentlemen, members of parliament, the problem we're asking you to talk about is very serious. That is a problem that is affecting all of our nationals. We require your support. Without a minimum support on the part of the members of parliament, the different measures we have to take will not be implemented, of course. If there isn't that minimal support, that minimal entente between the main political groups on the need to improve our finance, then of course the government's action wouldn't have any meaning. If it is only a question of pretending to making sure that you always give in to bargaining, if you always want to hide the most important to talk about what is not so important, if you want to ignore the fact that we're heading for a disaster, I will not be the man for such a policy. I believe in compromise when it respects the most important thing, the truth of men and women, the priorities between what is urgent and not urgent. We shouldn't have ambiguity in compromise. Asking the country's support when there's a need to act, that is the first article of the democratic contract. In areas that are so sensitive, I never thought in power struggle. I believe in shared conviction, and I think that we have to verify that basic agreement whenever is necessary. My conviction is that given the present situation, there are two possible ways only. One way towards which the world is going, the way that considers the destiny of people is to obey. And if you want to have this conflict between human rights and the present order, when you justify conflicts, disagreements, libel, and you probably see what is taking place in the west of America, you see how this approach of the bulldozer politics, the brutal power struggle seems to impose itself under the applause of some and the discouragement of others. And we're here to talk about the other project, the very project of democracy that considers it is more fruitful, more interesting to respect all citizens, all minorities, to consider them as partners and co-responsible of their own destiny. That approach, that method is based on shared truth, a truth shared with all French nationals. That will lead to the country's unity, and we should avoid perpetual division. The philosopher Max Sandier, who was here before and after the war, has defined that project of democracy. Democracy is the social organization that carries to its highest level conscience and responsibility of the citizen. Conscience, i.e., the clearest comprehension of things and events, and responsibility, i.e., commitment and engagement. As citizens, we're not here just to obey or fight. We're here to take our part of destiny with our eyes open and truth as a compass. We all ask ourselves questions, not only about our future, about the future of the world and the planet, but on the way we can take to build that future together. Ladies and gentlemen, members of Parliament, what I'm saying is that there is one way, it's the only one possible for France, the way of shared truth and the courage we choose together. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister.